All right,
Yeah,
it's on.
okay. So this is a second presentation with Bill Middlecamp. And most of you were here last week, know that he's one of the climate reality people, and also he's trained in En-ROADS, that's his presentation today. He has a degree in meteorology as well as computer science, and I forgot to say last week that he's on the board for Dakota Electric also. Um, and is a United Methodist Earth Keeper. So Bill's retired, but hardly retired, still working a lot to educate people about climate reality and climate change. And so I'll turn it over to Bill.
Thank you, Diane.
Yeah,
Yeah, I get to pick the work I do now.
yeah, yeah. So do I,
But
sort of.
I'm I'm pretty much as busy as I ever was. And, I'm very motivated by it and very excited by it. So I about 2 weeks before Earth Day, I was trying to come up with a presentation to talk about Earth Day. And I learned about Earth Day back at the very beginning. Was it 1970 that Earth Day was created? And I was a junior in high school, and I remember being very impressed by that whole activity, and the things that were happening back then were very exciting. And so in the process of trying to come up with something to talk about Earth Day, I had all these ideas that kept popping into my head, and they were all these sort of like sound bites, just concepts that I could spend a half hour on each one of them trying to explain them, but to get the whole message across in a short amount of time, I couldn't figure out what to talk about. And so I started writing these down, and then I ended up turning them into a poem. And the poem is my favorite poem, and I patterned it after that. My favorite poem is Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. I love that poem, and especially the ending of it, where it says, but I have miles to go before I sleep and miles to go before I sleep. And that really kind of informs my life. I just can't sleep with something as important as climate change. I mean, it's truly an existential problem. A lot of people aren't really willing to go that far in believing that it's a serious problem, but I fully believe that we will end human civilization along with a lot of the diversity of life on this earth if we don't figure out how to manage our impact on the world. So I wrote this poem, and I'd like to share it with you now. And I'll apologize, there's one kind of swear word in it. Hopefully that won't offend you, but I wanted it to have an impact. I wanted it to be shocking, and so you'll figure out when it gets there.
All welcome to the great Earth Day. Respect and honor it, they say. Brother, sister, Mother Earth
Can you hear it?
sustains us as we go our way. We recognize with shame the dearth we fain give back to this womb Earth, with little thought for its tomorrow and singular life-giving worth. Lack of gratitude gives sorrow, cannot pay back what we borrow. Too much focus on the fat, not enough on the marrow. Fear pins us on our comfy mat, stopping us from actions that correct the harms we've done for years. We're eating at the place we've shat. Those suffering are shedding tears. Collapsing livelihoods bring fears. Droughts are killing off their shade, their homelands turning into beers. What progress we humans have made, tame the earth with plans we've laid. Modern living builds a debt of exploitation's price unpaid. Fossilized carbon that we let escape its underground closet returns to us as rising sea and makes our riches salty wet. Weirder weather, can't you see, is setting fire to the tree, where many species, born and grown, will die because they cannot flee. Trashy piles of refuse drown the beauty of rich nature's crown. Grab, manufacture, sell, and toss does suffocate us, hold us down. We need not suffer any loss to save our grandkids from our dross. A better life is in our hands, mitigation's not a cross. Energy flows in our land, innovation is in our hand. A better life, sustainably, is our right we can demand. A better life, sustainably, is twice as rich and sets us free. Be not worried in this rat race that we'll go back up in the trees. Can we escape this madding pace and run away to outer space? Not moon nor Mars could be our home. A next-door star we cannot grace. We're locked under a starry dome. No science yet can let us roam away from floods, droughts, fires, and ice that melts and runs into the foam. It's different now. Extremes, like dice, roll double sixes. Once, twice, thrice, within a year, a month, a week. We shake our heads, so high a price. We hold our tongues. We dare not speak against the profits that we seek. We must prophesy this hour. 'Tis not the time to be too meek. We must prophesy this hour. Muster courage, truth to power. Tell our leaders, let them know. Preserving life preserves the flower. 6 decades past, scientists showed the rising threat we've come to know. The president, though he did heed, felt we had time. First, let us grow. 4 decades past, we planted seed of action, but too small a deed. Opponents rose, a well-heeled crowd, but facts prevailed and gained some speed. 2 decades past, truth got a shroud of misinformers, boastful, proud. The data they could not deny, the scientists could not be cowed. Today we know the reasons why. Each passing year sets records high. We won't be safe in Babel's tower. Ignore the truth and we shall fry. We must prophesy this hour. Muster courage, truth to power. Respect the bee, respect the flower. Protect the bee, protect the flower.
Thank you. I wanted to share something else with you. This is the cover of a recent Time magazine. The main story in here is about climate change, and it's pretty powerful. It talks about how throughout the world, not just here in the United States, but clearly with President Biden and his initiatives that he's shared, response to climate change is infused in everything, every policy, every administrative division of the government. It's all these different agencies are incorporating climate change into their plans. For example, HUD, housing. Not only are they focused now on affordable housing, but they're also focused on efficient housing, energy efficient, low carbon footprint housing, which has a double benefit, because when you're in low income, you really can benefit by saving money on your home utilities and your home energy consumption. So it not only sets up a better environment for the world, but also for the individuals who need to move into those homes. So it's a win-win or multi-solving kind of a situation. You don't just focus on one problem. There isn't just one agency in the government now that is focused on climate change that is, in the past would have been just sort of a bookkeeping function, keeping track of how much greenhouse gases we're emitting and trying to get industries to change. Now it's in everything. And, for example, in defense, the defense agencies in the United States are focused on the threats, and they've identified for some time now that climate change is a risk multiplier for our world. And even locally in our own country, we see things like rising crime, that as climate change has more of an effect and the world is getting warmer, we're actually seeing more crime. And there are people who link those two together, that when it's hot, there's more crime. This article in this Time magazine, it talks about how we have to focus on climate and how we plan, how we build, how we legislate, how we sell, how we educate, how we move, and how we create. So across the whole spectrum of our activities. And some of the things that are mentioned in this magazine, it talks about the economist Nicholas Stern, who led a group of economists that did this groundbreaking study in 2006, where they showed that climate change would lead to a 20% reduction in global GDP. 20% reduction because of climate change. So while a lot of people will say that addressing climate change is going to cost, and there are some famous economists who've actually quantified that and said, addressing climate change doing renewable energy will diminish the GDP by a small amount. And now it's really turned around, and the energy among economists is, the focus thinking is that no, it's worse if we don't address climate change, and it's better if we do. And some of this makes just simple logical sense. The innovation and the money that's spent to change our systems to being sustainable, that generates a whole lot of new business. And every time we've seen, like rebuilding after World War II, we've seen that the infusion of capital into addressing society's problems generates lots of jobs, lots of careers, and lots of wealth. So we need to change our thinking on that. This article also talks about how current commitments coming out of the Paris Accord, if all of the countries met their commitments, it would only lead to a 1% reduction in emissions. And that's not pulling down, we're still adding. We're still adding 99% of the emissions after all of those initiatives are met. So world leaders are finding out that, and they're recognizing that they have to take a much more dramatic approach to this. I want to talk a little bit about, and this is still preamble to getting into the En-ROADS portion of this, but I want to talk a little bit about this carbon budget and the 12 years we heard a few years ago, where we had 12 years to act to avoid the worst consequences of climate change. Now, a lot of people think, they kind of misrepresent what that said. They say, well, in 12 years, the world is going to come to an end. Well, it's such a ridiculous concept that they can then turn that around and make light of climate change. But what it actually said was, if we're going to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, if we're going to keep it at that level, which scientists have found is really a threshold for really dramatic changes in our world, then we have X amount of carbon that we can burn. And at the current rate, when they made this announcement, that was 12 years, a budget, if you will, of 12 years worth of our current emissions. Well, now 4 years, I think, have gone, maybe 5 years since that was announced. We haven't reduced the amount of carbon we're burning. We should be tapering down to make that 12 years longer. If you had a retirement account of $1 million and you figured you'd live for 30 years, well, you wouldn't spend $100,000 every year, because that would only give you 10-ish years of income. And then what would you do, right? So a normal person would look at the amount and they would adjust their spend rate to match what their budget is. Well, we should be looking at that carbon budget and saying, all right, we can't just come to a cliff and drop it off. We've got to taper down, try to make the tail of that budget as long as we possibly can, because there's a lot of elements of our society that are going to be really hard to totally get off of carbon. So we ought to go after the low-hanging fruit, cut the big chunks of carbon, cut the big chunks of greenhouse gas emissions, so that we can, focus on efficient ways and cost-effective ways to get rid of all of it, because eventually we'll have to get rid of all of it. All right, so that's this Time magazine. So let's talk about En-ROADS. I have on here the web page. It's climateinteractive.org. I think you shared that already, didn't you, Diane, with the group? A link to that? No? climateinteractive.org. And then when you go to that web page, you'll see a link to En-ROADS. You need to click twice to get to this page. This is something anybody can run. You don't have to have a license for it. It just runs in a browser on a computer. It won't run on an iPad or an iPhone or anything like that. It needs a computer in order to do what it does, because every time you do something in this thing, it does somewhere on the order of 10,000 calculations in a blink of an eye, and then you get to see the results of the decisions you've made. So let's talk a little bit about what this is. First of all, we've got these nice graphs on the top, and these are just two really valuable graphs. There's actually lots and lots of graphs. Here's a quick link to a dozen of them, but there's actually so many graphs that I can't remember where things are. And these are all the different graphs that you can look at. So you can really drill down into this thing. It is a compilation or a collection of all kinds of different knowledge built into one easy to use tool. This is kind of like a hand calculator. You know, I can do math in my head, a lot of people can, but a calculator takes me farther than I can go with my own brain. That's the same way this is. This En-ROADS tool allows you to take all the different possible policies, or most of the different possible policies that we can think of, combines them with the heavy science that's been done to project what happens in the real world, the physical world, as we add more carbon to the environment, as we add more other pollutants, and we change the aspects of our society. How does that all come together? You know, it's really hard for any one person to hold all of this information in their head. So this tool allows you, like a calculator, to play what-if scenarios, and it will take into account all of those side effects and all those interrelationships. It uses technology that is used for a lot of different purposes, not just this, called systems dynamics, where it takes into account all these side effects. It incorporates, as I said, all of the heavy lifting science, where the models that run on supercomputers for days, if not years, have done all these intense calculations. All of that is encoded in here. There's economics that are encoded in here. There's business practices encoded in here. For example, if you come up with a new technology and it's like just a killer app type of technology, you can't just go from 0 to 100% overnight. It takes time for all the industries that support that new way of doing things to ramp up. It takes time for people to be trained. And so there are these, the inertia, if you will, the inertia of changing society that's built into this. And so it's a really clever tool. Now, let me just talk briefly about what you see here. On the left, this graph, it shows all the energy that we consume as a society that comes from unnatural sources, if you will. So obviously, when we grow things, the sun shines on plants, and we're not counting that energy here, which is a tremendous amount of energy. But what we're counting here is the coal in brown, the oil in red, the natural gas in blue, renewable energies like wind and solar in green, this bioenergy, that's like burning wood or other sources of sort of renewable energy where we can grow something and then we can harvest it. And so it's a cycle, everything's in balance. And then this little sliver on the top, that's nuclear energy. And this is all sources of energy. It's not just electricity, but it's energy we use for driving our cars and trucks and boats and planes, as well as heating our buildings and anything else we use energy for. It's measured in exajoules, which is just a really, really big number. To put this into perspective is really hard to do, but I will just say that 1 kilowatt hour, which you buy from the electric company, 1 kilowatt hour is 3.6 million joules. So joule is a very small unit of energy. It's 1 watt for 1 second. An exajoule is, I think, 10 to the 21st. So that's a 1 with 21 zeros following it. So it's a very, very large number. A million, 10 to the 21th divided by 10 to the 6th, which is a million, is 10 to the 15th. That's 1,000 trillion. So 1,000 trillion-ish kilowatt hours is it's a lot of, it's big numbers, right? So this is where we're getting our energy from. That's really just what's important about that. Then over here on the right is the greenhouse gas emissions. How much are we producing? And as you can see, we're steadily rising, steadily rising. These are emissions, okay? This is not the cumulative amount of carbon dioxide that we put in the air and other greenhouse gases. This is the rate at which we're putting. And as you can see, this black line in the middle is status quo. And according to the status quo, we're just rising forever. We need to turn this around. We need to bend this curve downward, and we need to cross the zero line and go negative. We need to pull some of the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere that we put in it if we're going to stabilize our environment. So the blue line that surrounds the black line, that's the results of things we do. Okay, so if we, for instance, let's go over here, this is coal. If we put a heavy tax on coal, we bend that line downward a little bit for a little while, and then it also just continues to rise. All right, so that's how that works. Oh, and when we do that, we see this number over here. This is the net effect of the temperature at the end of the century. All these graphs run from 2000 to 2100. And of course, 2000 to 2021, that's history. So nothing we do can ever change the past, but we can change the future. All right. So then these knobs, these are sliders or knobs that allow you to tweak, and these represent policy decisions. They represent changes in society. So over here on the left, we're basically all the different ways we get energy: coal, oil, natural gas, bioenergy, renewables, nuclear, and something new that hasn't been invented yet, this new zero carbon. Maybe that's fusion energy, where we take two hydrogen atoms rather, and create a helium atom and release a whole bunch of energy. We've been working on that for many decades. We haven't figured it out yet, but maybe we'll figure it out. Is there someone who wants to ask a question? Okay. And then this one down here, which is not an energy source, but this carbon price is a way to affect how we use energy, where it comes from. If we make a carbon price, then we naturally, you can see in this, all right, let's just do this. I've got a loop function here, and you can see if we put a price on carbon, we reduce all these coal and natural gas and oil just because we use this carbon price. Okay, so that's all those in that block, that's energy. Then over here on the middle is how we use the energy. And a lot of it is used for transportation. A lot of it's used for building and industry. And that pretty much encompasses how we use energy. Then down at the bottom are some societal effects, like what if population is less? What if population is more? What if the economy is less and the economy is more? And these aren't really controls. It's just a way of asking the question, what if? What effect would it have? So you can play with those. Then over here on the right, we have some of the sources of greenhouse gases that aren't included in the carbon. So for instance, cutting down forests, and oftentimes we burn them when we cut them down. So what if we change that? And then this whole category of other greenhouse gases, methane, and these manufactured gases like Freon, the F gases because they have fluorine in them. What happens if we try to control those? So those are other impacts on greenhouse gas emissions. And then down here, this last block is ways we might actually take greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. So what if we planted more trees? That's what afforestation is. And what if we invented a machine that can actually take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and sequester it somehow, okay? Each one of these has the ability to drill down and find out more about them. If you click on those three dots, then you get a little explanation of what this thing is, and you get some knobs you can control that are kind of, tweaking the assumptions. These extra sliders under here, these are the assumptions that come from the best available science, economics, policy wonks, and what people really believe is the true inertia of society. But if you want to, you can go in there and you can play with them. You know, you can fake it and see, well, what if some magic happens? All right. So let me just give you a little example again. If we put a tax on coal, and I've got this looping function, we see that the coal drops clearly. It drops. Here we are in 2021. We don't see it dropping right away. It takes a while when you put a tax on coal for society to change. You know, you got all these power plants out there, and they're going to continue to work for a while, but they're going to respond to that price pressure, and they're going to diminish the use of coal to about the year 2059, 2060, and then it starts to curve up again. So it doesn't cure the problem. That alone doesn't fix the problem. We stop using coal for a while, and then we start using it again, start growing the use of it. Why do you think that is? Why doesn't it just go down and stay down?
Because we use up the alternatives.
Do we? Do we though? I mean, is there a limit to how much we can do with solar and wind?
No, but I'm looking at you're reducing coal and the response is to increase oil and gas. Nope.
You're right. I do see a larger amount of natural gas. And this is one of the key things about this model is that everything is isolated so that when you move a slider, one thing is affected. So for example, we have a growing population. Estimates are that we'll have 10 billion people on the planet by the year 2100. And so as the population grows, our need for energy grows. And so, yeah, if we don't do something like figure out how to, produce more renewables, then we with that growing need, we end up using more coal. And one last thing I want to say about the background of this model is it's for the whole globe. The idea of being able to say, well, what would happen in Minnesota or the United States or North America, it would be too hard to make the model. It would take too much energy to do the calculations. So this is on a whole Earth basis, but it's not too hard to see how, if we have this policy that works across the world, how we could do that better or worse in Minnesota. Anyway, the key to this is we not only have to tax coal, but we have to actually make it easier to do more renewables, all right? So now when we do more renewables, well, we haven't completely gotten rid of coal yet, but we do see that rather than growing natural gas, we reduce the natural gas, okay? But we haven't reduced oil when we do this. Why do you think that is? What do we use oil for more than anything else?
Vehicles, cars.
Cars, boats, planes, trains. All right, so what if we make cars, trains, planes, everything more energy efficient? Now what do we do? How does that affect coal? It doesn't really shrink coal. It shrinks our total energy demand by making things more efficient. Mm-hmm. There's another element to this. We need to electrify those things. What happens when we do that? Mm-hmm. Well, we certainly see a great reduction in the oil. And I want to point out something here. This, how long does it take for things to happen? You see that the status quo doesn't really diverge. We don't diverge from the status quo for at least 2025. And then by the time we get to 2030, we're only beginning to see the downward turn. We hit the bottom here around 2066, and then we start to climb again. So we have 59.66 gigatons of carbon dioxide emitted per year. So we continue to pump more in and not taking any out. But it takes time, and then there's this rebound effect. So we need to solve those problems as well. Well, because our time is limited, I want you to just jump in. I'm not going to spend a lot of time waiting for people to ask questions, but you're welcome to jump in at any point when you have a question or a thought. But I'm kind of going to go to the sweet spot here. This carbon price has a huge impact.
Wow.
It has an almost magical effect that it really kind of spans a whole lot of things that we do in society. And it does it in a way that is really palatable, actually, from a policy perspective. Carbon price basically is this. You look at the things that are emitting greenhouse gases, and you go all the way back to the source, so the mine, the well, and you add a price on there. You start small, and you grow it every year. You just keep growing it, growing it, growing it. And that makes a gentle pressure on society to start moving away from using those harmful sources of energy. There's an old truism that if you want less of something, you tax it. If you want more of something, you subsidize it. So putting this carbon price on where you start small and grow every year doesn't create a shock to society. It doesn't tell anybody what they can or cannot do. You can still fly in an airplane. It's just going to get more and more expensive. You can still drive a great big car that uses a lot of gasoline. Nobody's going to say you can't do that, but it's going to get more and more expensive, and it's going to look more and more attractive to go to cars that use less energy. So it's this gentle, freedom-based economic method of steering society in the direction you want it to go. People don't really think about it on a day-to-day basis. They don't have to make sacrifices. You just go to the market, and you look on the shelf, and here's a product that does everything you want, product A. Here's a product B that does everything you want. Product A uses less carbon, so it has a lower price. Product B uses more carbon, it has a higher price. So I, Joe consumer or Bill consumer, I'm in the grocery store, I'm in the Menards, I'm wherever I like to shop, and I see, oh, I'll pick that one. And I think I get my choice in the marketplace. Nobody's telling me what to do. The government is deciding what works and what doesn't work. It's really a free market economy, except for this economic pressure of trying to steer society in the direction it needs to go. So let's just say we'll maximize that, push that thing all the way as far as we can go. And what we see is we're not that 2 degrees centigrade that we wanted, 4.8 degrees Fahrenheit. 2 degrees centigrade would be 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. We still have a ways to go, but we've bent the curve downward somewhat in the greenhouse gas emissions. There's another chart that I really like, and it's this temperature chart. All right, this first dotted line here, that's the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal. The 2 degrees Celsius goal, which was the original goal of the Paris Accord, is here. And as you can see, we don't keep below 2 degrees. We don't keep below 1.5 degrees. In fact, we continue to increase the temperature. What do we do next? Well, what if let's just really push these renewables. Let's heavily subsidize renewables. And we see that we do grow a lot more renewables. We use a little bit less coal, a little bit less natural gas, but we haven't eliminated those, and we really need to eliminate those. Otherwise, we're on this constant upslope. We can slow down, we can change the slope and make it less steep, but we have to actually turn it around and go negative, go down with the slope. All right, so heavily subsidizing renewables didn't make that much of a difference, and the fact is, it was actually already built into the carbon price. So if you take the carbon price away, you can see how big of an effect that has. It by itself, go ahead.
What about carbon removable or removables? From what I understand, there is now encouragement to get industry and other scientists to figure out ways of taking carbon, out of the atmosphere and out of the things as we're burning them, etc. What effect would that have?
Yes, so there's some really interesting things going on with that. One of the most interesting things is recently, you all know who Elon Musk is, right? Elon Musk is, he's an incredibly successful entrepreneur. He started PayPal with some friends and his brother, and he made millions of dollars, I think hundreds of millions of dollars on PayPal. He took the money that he got from PayPal and he started investing in a couple of companies that do renewable energy. One of them was in the business of putting solar on people's roofs, and I'm blocking on the name of that. Solar City, maybe. Anyway, the other one was he invested in Tesla. Took a small company that had an interesting idea, and he just turned the knob up to 11 on that. He has been very successful at leading that company. He's also his number one company really is actually SpaceX, which has now developed these rockets that come down and land. The first stage of the rocket will actually come back to the launch pad and land, and they'll reuse it. They just recently sent up more astronauts to the International Space Station in a reused rocket. And it's just phenomenal. And they've gotten a contract now to send men to the moon or send humans to the moon. So very successful dude. And he has a philanthropic organization that has put up $100 million prize to develop technologies that'll take carbon out of the air. It's just fascinating. I just started reading about it, and I'm very excited by that. So yes, we have the ability to do it. We know it's possible, and this $100 million prize, the goal is to incentivize people to develop production scale, global scale systems that can actually make a difference. In this model, we have this technological slider over here, and that's what that is. I want to say a little bit more about carbon, removing carbon or capturing it. There's several different ways to do it. I mean, you can, first of all, move away from carbon, like with wind and solar. You can continue to burn carbon, but you can capture the carbon dioxide, keep it in a pipe instead of releasing it into the atmosphere. And there's a lot of people talking about that, but the reality is they haven't been very successful. And what scares me about that is they've got two ways to use that carbon. One is to pump it deep into the ground where they hope it'll stay. I just have this image of this great big burp and all the stuff coming out of the ground accidentally. Scares the bejeebers out of me. The other, which is really kind of disingenuous, is although they might capture the carbon dioxide from burning coal, they would then use it to pump it into oil fields to release more oil, which is kind of silly. Like I said, we have to turn that curve down and cross the zero line. We can't continue to use carbon. So then there are these machines that just purely take carbon out of the atmosphere, and you have to put money and energy into those machines to make them work. So there has to be a way to make some profit out of that. And that's a tough one to do politically, but I think that's going to happen at least in some parts of the world. And then the question is, what do you do with that carbon dioxide? When you've got it, there's a lot of questions about that, but let's just say we do figure that out. We invent this machine that can pull carbon out of the atmosphere, and we turn the knob up to 11. We push that as far as we can go, and you know what? We're getting really close to that 2-degree maximum. We didn't stay below 1.5. We didn't go back to 1.5. We know that there's a lot of serious impacts when you go from 1.5 to 2. And so, yeah, that's, let's hope we can do that. But I think we're running out of time. When do we have to end?
10. How about 10 o'clock? So we've got 4 minutes or so. How about doing it the old-fashioned way with planting more trees and cover crops and things that will use the carbon?
Very good. So afforestation and, plant 1,000,000 trillion trees, deforestation, stop cutting them down. How much of a difference does that make? Just by itself, how much of a difference does it make?
Hardly any.
Hardly any. But, our diet leads to the production of methane. We all know that cows produce methane. If we change our diet, that's in this slider. And so cutting down on methane, well, that has a big effect. And these F gases, if we get those, make sure that they don't get released into the atmosphere. So properly recycle refrigerators, air conditioners, and all other uses of these dangerous chemicals. Then what's really interesting is if we, and I know we're out of time, so I'm just going to say, let's electrify our transportation. Let's make it more efficient. Let's electrify our buildings, which is a huge thing, and make those more efficient. Look at this. We actually now stay below 2. We come close to getting to that 1.5 degrees. So now let's put these technological ways of pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. And we actually turn the curve negative, the slope negative. We still exceed the 1.5, but we actually pull it back down again. So, and I haven't even talked about what happens if we change the population, which a lot of people are afraid of, and what happens if we change the economy, which a lot of people are afraid of. Those things actually don't have that big of an effect. Obviously, there's advantages to having fewer people in the world because we put a heavy burden on the world. But as you can see, there's more things you can play with here. One of the things that people say is, well, we have to do nuclear. But there's lots more knobs you can play with. And then let's just go back to that greenhouse gas emissions. And as you can see, we've actually pulled it below. We crossed the 0 line here in 2053, and we continue to pull carbon dioxide. So the future looks better. It's not just a one-way path. So I wish we had more time. There's a heck of a lot of stuff we could talk about here. People talk about this, I mean, when they get really intensely into it, they go on for days exploring this and simulating and playing roles of, what if I'm this sector of society or that? But I hope I've at least given you enough of a taste of this that you'll be motivated to go out and play with it. But the big takeaway from this is there's no silver bullet. We have to do everything we can. We have to apply this, as I talked about at the beginning, across all sectors of society, across the whole world. And nobody gets a pass. But we can do it, and we can do it without making sacrifices, because frankly, I believe that people don't make sacrifices for long, and they often end up doing worse in the long run. So I want it to be that we have free will, we have freedoms, we have a comfortable life. We're not going back up into the trees. We're not going to go back to the Stone Age. We have the ability to innovate. We have a lot of clever people around the world, and we can solve this problem.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Thank you for that introduction, which is kind of what it is.
Yeah.
And, yeah, and so people know what they can do, and then personally what they can do. So thank you so much.
And Kelly mentioned plastics, and absolutely, we have to figure out plastics. Plastics are going to be with us forever, but let's control them. Let's get away from single use. We want to use plastics for things that we use for decades, not for 10 seconds and throw away, you know. And then let's make sure that those plastics don't get out into the environment, because there's all kinds of negative side effects.
Yep, a lot to think about. A lot to do.
I really appreciate the opportunity to share this with you. Thank you very much. And
okay, thank you.
Get to work.
We gotta go. Yeah, get to work.
get to work.
Yeah. We'll
I
see
used
you
to work for
tomorrow
Cray
night.
Research. I used to
Bye.
work for Cray Research, and Seymour Cray used to say, "Now get busy." He'd
Yeah.
give these brilliant talks, and he'd say, "Now go to work."
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye,
Have a
Bill.
wonderful Sunday.
Thank you. You too.